Imagine a world where the only voice you hear is your own, echoing off the walls of a small, silent room. For a while, solitude can feel like a gentle retreat, a rare chance to breathe, reflect, and recharge away from the constant demands of daily life. Most people crave these moments of peace, and science backs up their value. Time alone can lower stress, boost creativity, and help us process our thoughts. But what happens when solitude is no longer a choice? When it's not a peaceful escape but a condition imposed on you, stretching on with no clear end in sight? Suddenly, the comfort of being alone transforms into something much darker and more unsettling. The effects of this kind of isolation are not just emotional, they ripple through every part of a person's being, often in ways that are both surprising and profound. While everyone's experience is unique, there's a common thread. The longer someone is cut off from meaningful contact and activity, the more deeply the consequences take root. When a person is confined to a single space, unable to leave or interact, and stripped of purposeful tasks, the body and mind begin to change in ways that are hard to reverse. At first, the mind may race with thoughts, searching for stimulation or distraction, but as the days blur together, a sense of emptiness can settle in. The world outside feels distant, almost unreal, and the boundaries between day and night, between reality and imagination, start to blur. This isn't just a matter of feeling bored or lonely, it's a fundamental shift in how a person experiences themselves and the world around them. The isolation seeps into every corner of their life, reshaping their sense of time, identity, and even their physical health. It's a slow, relentless process that can leave lasting scars, long after the door finally opens. In the early days of forced isolation, the body's stress response kicks into high gear. Hormones like cortisol flood the system, preparing the body to face a threat that never quite arrives. This heightened state of alertness might help someone cope at first, but as the days drag on, the stress becomes chronic, wearing down both mind and body. Social interaction and meaningful activity aren't just pleasant distractions, they're essential for keeping us grounded. They provide what psychologists call social reality testing, a way to check our perceptions and emotions against those of others. Without this feedback, a person's sense of self can start to unravel. Thoughts loop endlessly, unchecked by outside perspective, and impulses that would normally be tempered by social norms begin to take over. The mind, deprived of stimulation and connection, can spiral into depression, obsessive thinking, and even suicidal thoughts. For some, the boundaries between reality and imagination become dangerously thin, leading to delusions or hallucinations. Over time, the brain itself begins to change. The limbic system, which regulates fear and stress, becomes hypersensitive, reacting to even minor triggers with intense emotion. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, judgment, and self-control, can actually shrink, making it harder to focus, remember, or think clearly. The balance shifts away from rational thought and toward raw emotion, and as this state persists, it becomes the new normal. Anxiety, anger, and irrational behavior become more common, and the ability to regulate emotions or make sound decisions fades. The longer the isolation lasts, the more deeply these changes are etched into the brain, making recovery a long and difficult road. The effects of isolation don't stop at the mind, they reach deep into the body, quietly disrupting the rhythms that keep us healthy and whole. As days stretch into weeks, the sense of time itself can begin to dissolve. Without the usual cues from the outside world, conversations, routines, sunlight filtering through windows, people often lose track of whether it's morning or night, weekday or weekend. This confusion seeps into sleep, making it hard to fall asleep or stay asleep, and dreams can become vivid, strange, or even nightmarish. The body, already under siege from chronic stress, starts to show signs of strain. Heart palpitations may come out of nowhere, a racing pulse that refuses to slow down. Headaches throb behind the eyes, sometimes lasting for hours, and dizziness can make even standing up feel like a challenge. The senses, deprived of normal stimulation, become hypersensitive. Sudden noises or bright lights can feel overwhelming, and even the smallest discomfort can seem magnified. Appetite often fades, not just from boredom, but from the way stress twists the stomach into knots, making food unappealing or even nauseating. Over time, weight loss becomes common, and the body's immune system may weaken, leaving a person more vulnerable to illness. The longer the isolation continues, the more these physical symptoms become part of daily life, compounding the emotional toll and making it even harder to cope. People do what they can to fight back against the emptiness. Some try to build routines, carving out small islands of normalcy in a sea of uncertainty. Exercise, even in a cramped space, becomes a lifeline, stretching, pacing, anything to keep the blood moving and the mind occupied. Reading and writing offer a way to escape, if only for a little while, into other worlds or into the safety of memory. But these strategies, while helpful, can only do so much. The relentless sameness of each day, the lack of meaningful contact, and the absence of purpose wear down even the strongest spirits. It's no wonder that the United Nations and human rights organizations have called this kind of prolonged, forced isolation a form of torture. Yet, for countless people around the world, especially those in prison, this is a daily reality. In the United States alone, tens of thousands of people spend nearly every hour of every day in solitary confinement, locked in small, windowless cells with little to do and almost no one to talk to. The cells themselves are often barely larger than a parking space, and the silence is broken only by the occasional clang of a door or the distant echo of footsteps. For many, the only way to mark the passage of time is by counting meals or watching the slow crawl of light across the floor. The story of solitary confinement is as old as the prison system itself, and its roots are tangled in good intentions and harsh realities. In the late 1700s, Quaker reformers in the United States introduced the idea of solitary confinement as a humane alternative to physical punishment. They believed that time alone would encourage reflection and repentance, giving rise to the very word penitentiary. But it didn't take long for critics to see the darker side of this practice. Writers, judges, and even the Supreme Court spoke out against it, warning that the psychological damage was far worse than any physical pain. Charles Dickens, after visiting a U.S. prison, described solitary confinement as worse than any torture of the body, a verdict echoed by many who witnessed its effects firsthand. For a time, the use of solitary confinement declined, but in the 1980s, as prison populations soared and tough-on-crime policies took hold, it made a grim comeback. Overcrowded prisons turned to solitary as a tool for control, using it not just for violent offenders but for minor rule breakers, sometimes for something as small as talking back to a guard. The harm caused by solitary confinement is not limited to those with no history of mental illness. In fact, many of those placed in isolation already struggle with mental health issues, and the experience only deepens their suffering. The scars left by solitary don't fade when the cell door finally opens. People who have endured long stretches in isolation are far more likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder, and many find that their personalities have shifted in subtle but profound ways. Ordinary situations can trigger waves of anxiety or paranoia, and the simple act of connecting with others can feel overwhelming. Concentration becomes elusive, and the world outside the cell can seem both too bright and too fast. Some states have tried to limit the use of solitary confinement, especially for children, pregnant women, or those with serious mental illness, and a few have set strict time limits. But these rules are not always enforced, and loopholes allow the practice to continue in many places. While the United States continues to rely heavily on solitary confinement, other countries have chosen a different path. Norway, for example, has reimagined its prison system from the ground up, focusing on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Fewer people are locked up, and those who are receive far more support better living conditions, access to education and work programs, and opportunities to build real skills for life after release. The results speak for themselves. Norway has one of the lowest rates of people returning to prison in the world. This approach suggests a simple but powerful truth. People are more likely to heal, grow, and change for the better when they are treated with dignity and given the chance to connect with others. In the end, the story of isolation is not just about suffering, it's about the choices societies make, and the hope that, even in the darkest places, there is a way forward that values humanity over punishment.